What is up, everybody? We're on day 93 of our Bible in a Year series. Today we're getting into a interesting story, you can say. This is one of my favorite things about the Bible, and something that I think actually could be evidence for the Bible, in favor of the Bible, at least in favor of the Bible being true. The people in the Bible, even the people that are portrayed as heroes or good guys, if you will, they are not without flaws. Like some pretty major flaws, like we're going to see today. We're talking about King David still. This is a story I think most people would probably be familiar with. But we're in 2 Samuel chapter 10. And this is the reason I say I think it's evidence is because if you're making something up, you're going to want to make those people look as good as possible. And so you're not typically going to show, or if there are flaws, they're minor. But the people we see in the Bible that are like I said, quote unquote, good guys, they are frequently, we see them in some really, really bad stuff. And the point of that is God redeems them. And but it's not good. It's really not good today. Let's get into it. 2 Samuel chapter 10. Sometime later, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun became king in his place. Then David said, I'll show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent his emissaries to console Hanun concerning his father. However, when they arrived in the land of the Ammonites, the Ammonite leaders said to Hanun, their lord, just because David has sent men with condolences for you, do you really believe he's showing respect for your father? Instead, hasn't David sent his emissaries in order to scout the city, spy on it, and demolish it? So Hanun took David's emissaries, shaved off half their beards, cut their clothes in half at the hips, and sent them away. When this was reported to David, he sent someone to meet them. Since they were deeply humiliated, the king said, stay in Jericho until your beards grow back, then return. When the Ammonites realized they had become repulsive to David, they hired 20,000 foot soldiers from the Arameans of Beth Rehob and Zobah, 1,000 men from the king of Makkah, and 12,000 men from Tob. David heard about it and sent Joab and all the elite troops. The Ammonites marched out and lined up in battle formation at the entrance to the city gate, while the Arameans and Zobah and Rehob, Tob, Joab, and Makkah were in the field by themselves. When Joab saw that there was a battle line in front of him and another behind him, he chose some of Israel's finest young men and lined up in formation to engage the Arameans. I keep wanting to say Armenians, but that's not right. He placed the rest of the forces under the command of his brother, Abishai. They lined up in formation to engage the Ammonites. If the Arameans are too strong for me, Joab said, then you will be my help. However, if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I'll come to help you. Be strong. Let's prove ourselves strong for our people and for the cities of our God. May the Lord's will be done. Joab and his troops advanced to fight against the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites saw that the Arameans had fled, they too fled before Abishai and entered the city. So Joab withdrew from the attack against the Ammonites and went to Jerusalem. When the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer sent messengers to bring the Arameans who were beyond the Euphrates River, and they came to Helam with Shobach, commander of the Hadadezer's army, leading them. When this was reported to David, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Helam. Then the Arameans lined up to engage David in battle and fought against him. But the Arameans fled before Israel. David killed 700 of their chariots and 40,000 foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobach, commander of their army, who died there. When all the kings who were Hadadezer's subjects saw they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became their subjects. After this, the Arameans were afraid to ever help the Ammonites again. Okay, chapter 11. And this is where we really get into this. In the spring, when kings march out to war, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel. So, I'll finish this verse. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. They're starting off this chapter letting you know David is not where he was supposed to be as a king. So David is the king of Israel, right? In the spring, when kings march out to war, David sent Joab. So then they did all this, but David remained in Jerusalem. So they're starting off letting you know David's not where he is supposed to be. Verse 2. One evening, David got up from his bed and strolled around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, a very beautiful woman. So David sent someone to inquire about her. And he said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent messengers to get her. When she came to him, he slept with her. Now she had just been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Afterward, she returned home. The woman conceived and sent word to inform David, "I am pregnant." David sent orders to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." So Joab sent Uriah and David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab and the troops were doing and how the war was going. Then he said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the door of the palace with all his master's servants. He did not go down to his house. When it was reported to David, Uriah didn't go home. David questioned Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a journey? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah answered David, "The ark, Israel, and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my master Joab and his soldiers are camping in an open field. How can I enter my house to eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As surely as you live, and by your life, I will not do this." "Stay here today also," David said to Uriah, "and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next day. Then David invited Uriah to eat and drink with him, and David got him drunk. He went out in the evening to lie down on his cot with his master's servants, but he did not go home. So, I've seen some different implications with this. I've seen some people say that Uriah is just a really dedicated soldier, and that's what is going on here. And he really is dedicated. I've heard some people say that Uriah was aware of what had happened, and David wants Uriah to go home and be with Bathsheba, to know her in a biblical sense, and that way this child that had been conceived, that was David's, would be passed off as Uriah's. I've heard some people say that Uriah knew this somehow, and he was not going to give David the easy way out of doing that. Now, I don't know for sure which one it is. I don't think we can know for sure which one it is. I Um, I lean towards the first one, that he was just really a dedicated soldier. I think you have to read a little more into the text than what's there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something that is more straightforward in actually saying that it is one or the other. But as far as I'm aware, I think you have to read a little bit more into the text than what's there. That might be the case. If you believe that's the case, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. It's making an assumption that I don't want to make assumptions unless I have better evidence to do so. But either way, David was in the wrong, very in the wrong. And he's trying to, instead of trying to get forgiveness, instead of repenting for the sin, he's trying to cover it up. And he's about to cover it up even more, or attempt to cover it up even more. Verse 14. The next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Put Uriah at the front of the fiercest fighting, then withdraw from him, so that he is struck down and dies." When Joab was besieging the city, he put Uriah in the place where he knew the best enemy soldiers were. Then the men of the city came out and attacked Joab, and some of the men from David's soldiers fell in battle. Uriah the Hittite also died. Joab sent someone to report to David all the details of the battle. He commanded the messenger, "When you've finished telling the king all the details of the battle, if the king's anger gets stirred up and he asks you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you realize they would shoot from the top of the wall?' At Thebez, who struck Abimelech, son of Jerubasheth, didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the top of the wall so that he died? Why did you get so close to the wall? Then say, 'Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also.'" Then the messenger left. When he arrived, he reported to David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger reported to David, "The men gained the advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we counterattacked right up to the entrance of the city gate. However, the archers shot down on your servants from the top of the wall, and some of the king's servants died. Your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab. Don't let this matter upset you, because the sword devours all alike. Intensify your fight against the city and demolish it. Encourage him." Went too far. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah had died, she mourned for him. When the time of mourning ended, David had her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. However, the Lord considered what David had done to be evil. So, David doesn't really seem to be worried about the battle, doesn't really seem to be worried about anything going on. What he was concerned with trying to cover up his sin. Now, this is not the end of the story. This is so it's kind of ruined me. But VeggieTales, if anyone is familiar, I still remember watching King George and the Rubber Ducky, and anytime there's several stories. David and Goliath is like that. March Around Jericho is like that for me. But there are several stories like that where I still remember the VeggieTales details, if you will. Chapter 12. So the Lord sent Nathan to David. When he arrived, he said to him, "There were two men in a certain city." Now, Nathan is a prophet. Just FYI, before we get into this, Nathan was a prophet. "There were two men in a certain city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very large flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one small ewe lamb that he had bought. He raised her, and she grew up with him and with his children. From his meager food she would eat, from his cup she would drink, and in his arms she would sleep. She was like a daughter to him. So, the I think the language being used here is intentional. Remember, sorry, my eye is itching really bad. Remember, before David was king, David was a shepherd. So David probably would have had some interactions like this with sheep. I'm going to guess, from what I've seen, sheep are incredibly stupid, as terrible as that probably sounds. But from what I've seen, sheep are not intelligent, but they require a lot of babysitting, tending to. And so I think you're bound to have some that maybe require more than others, just like with anything else. Some kids require more like direct attention than other kids. I've managed at a company before, and I had employees that required more direct attention than other employees did. Had dogs before, and so I think this anything you're gonna have some that require more than others. And so, since sheep maybe require even more than what most people are used to, there's going to be sheep that require even more than what the average sheep does. So I think David's going to have some familiarity with this, and he's going to recall, I think, instances where he did some stuff like this. And he had to be out in the field, and he fought off lions and bears, right? Verse 4. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man could not bring himself to take one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the poor man's lamb and prepared for his guest. David was infuriated with the man and said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die, because he has done this thing and shown no pity. He must pay 4 lambs for that lamb." Anyone get what just happened? Verse 7. Nathan replied to David, "You are the man. This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I rescued you from Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judah, and if that was not enough, I would have given you even more. Why then have you despised the Lord's command by doing what I consider evil? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife as your own wife. You murdered him with the Ammonites' sword. Now, therefore, the sword will never leave your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own wife." So, David thought he had gotten away with it, but nope, did not. God sees it all. Verse 11. This is what the Lord says. I'm going to bring disaster on you from your own family. I will take your wives and give them to another before your very eyes, and he will sleep with them in broad daylight. You acted in secret, but I will do this before all Israel and in broad daylight. David responded to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Then Nathan replied to David, and the Lord has taken away your sin. You will not die. However, because you treated the Lord with such contempt in this matter, the son born to you will die. Then Nathan went home. So, there's it can be hard to read. But again, and I hit on this a lot when we were in Leviticus, this is part of this is the importance, showing the importance, or the not the importance, the severity of sin, and how wicked and evil and wrong sin is. So let's continue. Verse 15. Then Nathan went home. The Lord struck the baby that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became deathly ill. David pleaded with God for the boy. He fasted, went home, and spent the night lying on the ground. The elders of his house stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he was unwilling and would not eat anything with them. On the seventh day, the baby died. But David's servants were afraid to tell him the baby was dead. They said, "Look, while the baby was alive, we spoke to him, and he wouldn't listen to us. So now, can we tell him the baby is dead?" He may do something desperate. When David saw that his servants were whispering to each other, he guessed that the baby was dead. So he asked his servants, "Is the baby dead?" "He is dead," they replied. Then David got up from the ground. He washed, anointed himself, changed his clothes, went to the Lord's house and worshipped. Then he went home and requested something to eat. So they served him food, and he ate. His servants asked him, "Why have you done this? While the baby was alive, you fasted and wept, but when he died, you got up and ate food." He answered, "While the baby was alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let him live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I'll go to him, but he will never return to me." So, I think this is interesting to see. Kind of an acknowledgement. God had told him, this is going to happen. The baby's going to die, right? And he still was going about fasting, praying, trying to change God's mind. And it didn't happen. The baby died. And once the baby was gone, it's almost, he accepted that it was done, and he got up and went about what he needed to do. I think too, it's important to see that he's not trying to blame God, even though, it says God caused this, but it was on account of David's sin, and David acknowledges that this is because of what he did. So, continue. 24. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and slept with her. She gave birth to a son and named him Solomon. The Lord loved him, and he sent a message through the prophet Nathan, who named him Jedediah because of the Lord. So, an interesting detail we'll see later on that, and this is another thing, I think, kind of seeing the sovereignty of God. But he ends up, Jesus comes through, he's the son of David, but he comes through the line of Solomon. So Jesus' ancestral line comes from David and Bathsheba. Interesting little tidbit. Verse 26. Joab fought against Rabbah and the Ammonites and captured the royal fortress. Then Joab sent a messenger to David to say, "I have fought against Rabbah and have also captured its water supply. Now therefore assemble the rest of the troops, lay siege to the city, and capture it. Otherwise I will be the one to capture the city, and it will be named after me." So David assembled all the troops, and he went to Rabbah. He fought against it and captured it. He took the crown from the head of their king, and it was placed on David's head. The crown weighed 75 pounds of gold, and it had precious stone in it. In addition, David took away a large quantity of plunder from the city. He removed the people who were in the city and put them to work with saws, iron picks, and iron axes, and to labor at brickmaking. He did the same to all the Ammonite cities. Then he and all his troops returned to Jerusalem. Okay. That is it for the reading. Tomorrow, it gets a little bit even more dicey, if you can believe that. The Bible is not PG-13. It is very much rated R, quite frequently throughout. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my questions. So like I said, tomorrow's going to be even dicier. Interesting dynamic we see play out in tomorrow's reading. But let's continue with our questions for today. Question 1. David's fall in chapter 11 begins with idleness and escalates to grave sin. How does this narrative challenge us to consider the theological reality of sin's progressive nature and our need for vigilance and holiness? I think for me, just in my life, I've seen a lot of this actually ring true. The idea that, what's the saying? Idle hands are the devil's playground, or something along those lines. But this idea of not being vigilant, being idle, not really focusing on things, but like kind of honestly being lazy with things, I think it is a perfect time to strike against you. Because if you're up doing stuff, if I'm actively preparing for stuff for the podcast, or I'm doing my day job, or doing something with my kids or like my wife or anything like that, my attention is on something. My focus is on something, and it's a lot more difficult to pull my attention to something that is wrong or evil, sinful, what have you. And I think also, if I'm focused on, so let's look at specifically immoral sin like lust, right? If for me personally, because that's something I've dealt with in the past, addiction, and if I am doing something with my kids or my wife, for like this podcast and stuff, it is going to be more difficult to pull me away, because not only is my focus on something, but if I fall back into that life, there's a good chance I'm going to lose my wife. I may not lose my kids necessarily, but there's definitely going to be a hard change up in the relationship. I enjoy the podcast, and that's something as well that could get taken away. And so really, when you see these things happen, I think a lot of times it's when your focus is not on God. You're not focused on things that are blessings that could be ruined by what you're going to be tempted into. And it's just when you're generally lazy, being lazy, relaxing, as some people would say, right? Just not doing anything, not focusing on anything. I think it makes it easier for your mind to get pulled away and pulled into stuff. And so I think that's when, even if we are not actively doing something, we should be vigilant in our minds. Always be vigilant with your mind. Question 2. Nathan's parable in chapter 12 pierces David's conscience, prompting repentance. How does this divine confrontation deepen our understanding of God's justice as inseparable from his redemptive pursuit of the sinner? I think it shows that no one is above God's law. No one is good enough. Even, David was called a man after God's own heart. And he still fell into this. He still willingly walked into this. So I think there is an element of that you, you don't want to get too quote unquote big for your britches, right? And don't ever think that you are above temptation or above falling. I think it is very, very unwise to have that kind of a view. But also I think it shows that like in this situation, I don't think David had forgotten about what he did. I think that's foolish to think that that's the case. But I do think that David, at that moment, he maybe wasn't thinking about it. He was trying to just get past it. If you think about it, she found out she was pregnant, and then the baby had been born. And then Nathan comes. And so this is a decent amount of time that had passed. And I'm sure it ate at David. I'm sure he thought about it. And Nathan comes, does this. And so the guilty conscience in David comes out that punishment is going to happen. And then Nathan flips it around. He realizes, okay, I didn't get away with this. God does see this. And then he repents, comes back to God. And that is a good thing. I think God will send people and things to show us, especially if you're actively praying for it. But God will send us things and people to show us areas that we're in the wrong, or that we need to improve, or that we need to change. And that's a good thing. He corrects those he loves, right? Question 3. God forgives David, yet allows consequences to remain. How might the tension invite us to wrestle with the theological interplay between grace, discipline, and the sanctifying purpose of suffering in God's covenant people? I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before. But the idea that you can be forgiven eternally for something, but there are still ramifications to that here in this earth. So the example I gave was Jeffrey Dahmer, right? I have every reason to believe, from what I've seen, that Dahmer is going to be in heaven. Why? Because it looks like he, in his final days, he gave his life to Christ. He repented of his sins, and there was a pastor or a priest or somebody that went in there with him, and it seems like he had a genuine conversion, and it wasn't. He did not know he was about to die, because then he got killed by, I think it was within like a day or a couple days, he got killed by some other inmates. But I forgot where I was going with this. There can still be, even though he was forgiven in an eternal sense, in the sacrifice that Jesus made went to him as well. There were still consequences in this life for what he had done. And if he had not been taken out by another inmate, he would have faced those consequences. I don't know off the top of my head if he ended up getting a death sentence or life or what it was. But there would have been consequences that he still would have had to pay for. And I think that's not a bad thing. We have to understand that there are consequences for our actions. Sometimes those consequences are eternal. Sometimes they are here in this life. And it's a good thing to understand that, to see that. So we are quite a bit over what our normal is. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I think I answered the question. So we will end it there. Appreciate everyone watching, listening, all that. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you want to answer the questions in the comments, you can do that. Or ask a question or bring up something that you noticed, or really anything like that. I enjoy having a conversation with people. So that's always welcome. If this has been a blessing to you, don't forget to spread the word. Word of mouth is the best way that podcasts spread. So if it's been a blessing to you, you can share it with other people. It can be a blessing to them as well. Hopefully encourage people to stick with a daily reading habit, getting into the word every single day and reading it. It will change your life. I can honestly say I don't think that you can do that and not have it change your life. So tomorrow, like I said, it's going to be a little more dicey. So come prepared. I'll try to remember to put a warning up beforehand, because it's there's there's a lot that happens in the reading for tomorrow, and it's pretty intense at points. So yeah, we will get into that tomorrow. But until then, God bless.